Good evening and welcome to APTA's live event on Pathways to Leadership as part of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion events. The mark of a good leader is knowing when to lead and always being primed to listen. Today, we are 12 days away from Election Day of the leader of the free world, which happens to be at another pivotal point in its history of civil rights, or lack thereof. Amongst many asks, we are demanding, yet again, for better representation. Not for better representation, but equitable representation in positions of leadership in our government, in our workplaces, and as we discussed tonight, in the profession of physical therapy. My name is Hadia Green Guerrero. I am a doctor of physical therapy and I work in the practice department. And I am excited as we confer with our panelists tonight to discuss these pathways to leadership and their thoughts on it. What I'd like you to do during the discussion is to please post your questions in the chat of the platform you are streaming through, and we will address them to the best of our ability in the last 30 minutes of today's live event. Without further ado, let's introduce our fabulous panel. Doctors Talina Corvus, Yustra Iftakahara, Kim Nixon Cave, Ladarius Woods, and Bernadette Williams York. Dr. Corvus, I'm going to start with you. Please share with us your current professional and community roles and positions, and for what organizations, if you care to share. And then I'll ask you one question and follow up.
All right, thank you. Glad to be here. So yes, my name is Talina Corvus. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I'm a geriatric clinical specialist. I work at Pacific University, where I am an assistant professor to the Education and Leadership PhD program, as well as the Interprofessional Education program. I'm adjunct faculty to the Doctor of Physical Therapy program, and kind of just around and about Pacific University as I am able. I am the founding chair of APTA Oregon's Cultural and Minority Affairs Committee. I am a faculty advisor for the student group, the Student-Led Collective for Diversity and Social Justice at Pacific University as well. And I serve on the board of the advisory board for the Board of Health for Yamhill County, where I live.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that background. Do you think of yourself as a leader? Whether you do or not, what makes you or others identify you as a leader?
Yes, I do not, but I am working on it. And there are reasons for that. So my PhD is in education and leadership. And when considering programs, I almost didn't consider this program because I love education, but the thought of leadership was actually very off-putting. And I realized I pushed myself to go into the program anyway, because I really did like education and I liked the program. And as I got into it, I realized that the reason I thought of leadership in the way that I did is because I hadn't been served leadership in frames that were very culturally relevant to me. So I never saw myself personally reflected in the way we talk about leadership as a culture. And so once I got into it, I realized how much I really, really enjoyed it and how much I really liked being able to break it open. And so I'm working on it. But in that working on it, I think realizing that part of leadership for me is not so much what you do, but what you think, right? It's finding your reasons and finding your whys. And once I realized that you could approach leadership in a different way, I began to see myself differently as a leader, even though I had been put in a lot of positions to guide people or to guide initiatives or to train or to educate, and educators are leaders. It took me a while to kind of come around to owning that.
I thank you for your candidness in that response. I can definitely relate myself. Dr. Iftakahara, I'll ask you the same question next. And that is to please share with us your current professional and or community roles and positions. And then I'll ask you the same question following.
Sure. Hey, y'all. My name is Yustra Iftakahara. I am a fresh PT, so I just graduated from the Duke Doctor of Physical Therapy program back in May. I'm hoping to start practicing as an outpatient PT next month. I'm currently the Director of Communications for the APTA Student Assembly for a few more weeks till the end of NSC. And I also work closely with a free specialty health clinic that my family helped to start a couple years ago.
That's awesome. So do you think of yourself as a leader, and whether you do or not, what makes you or others identify you as a leader?
So almost after Dr. Corvus's answer, I hesitate to say this, but I do. And I think for me, it's more so based on just the way that other people see me and approach me. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I don't love the word leader. I don't love like the idea of leadership because I think that it can be kind of hierarchical when it doesn't always have to be. I love that Dr. Corvus mentioned like a guide or an educator. Like I think that people can take on those roles without formally being in those roles, and that I like a lot more. So I think that with me, a lot of it comes from kind of like my online presence and me just having given maybe words or a voice to things that students in the past haven't felt as comfortable sharing either online publicly or with their mentors or their classmates or whomever. So I think for better or worse, like that's why people see me as a leader. But I think too, something that I really, really struggle with is when I hear leader and when I see someone who's quote unquote popular, I put them on a pedestal. And I think that creates unrealistic expectations as well. And so for me, it's a lot more about just like the quality of like the work that you're doing and your intent behind it versus someone else just like saying that you're a leader, you saying that you're a leader.
Thank you so much. I would like to now ask Dr. Nixon Cave to please share with us your roles as a professional in the community and any positions you hold, and if you're comfortable, for what organizations. And then let's ask you the same question following as well.
Okay. My name's Kim Nixon Cave. I'm a professor currently at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. I am the program director for the entry-level program and executive program director for the College of Rehab Sciences for residency, fellowship, OT fellowships, and continuing education. I have a PhD in education and also a pediatric certified specialist. Recently, in the last couple of years, I had the honor of being named a fellow the American Physical Therapy Association. And so I've had opportunities to be in various, what individual will call a leadership positions throughout, within the APTA and outside of the APTA. As far as considering myself a leader, I'm kind of like Talina. I really, for me, when you think about a leader, it's a title sometimes, when, as the young lady before me said, you know, puts people on a pedestal. I see myself as someone who takes opportunity to develop myself and to develop others. When I take on a position, I set goals to achieve, you know, goals or achieve what I was hired to do. But within that, I'm also looking to help develop others. So some might see me as a leader, but I don't see myself as a leader. I see myself as working with others. You know, I had the opportunity to be at a children's hospital in Philadelphia and had probably close to 200 individuals that work with me, and my leadership team. I never, you know, I always said I work with them. I wasn't the leader. It was, we were working together. So it's hard because I don't think I have seen myself as a leader and haven't seen individuals that look like me in those types of leadership positions. So, you know, I don't think I'm comfortable with the term of being a leader. Others may say I'm a leader, but I don't see myself as a leader.
Thank you for that. And for all that you already have done. You all have amazing backgrounds and just hearing each of your individual backgrounds, I'm sure is inspiring to our listeners. So thank you for being who you are in the spaces that you are and being living examples. Dr. Woods, I'd like to speak with you next. May you share with us your current professional and community roles and positions and whether or not you see yourself as a leader.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for everybody who's joining and who's listening in, who's listening live, or will come back and listen to it afterwards. But my name is Ladarius Woods, and I'm an assistant professor at Alabama State University. And I've been here almost going on 3 years now. Similar to a few of our other panelists, I have a PhD in education also. So my topic was adult education. More specifically, I looked at our diversity and equity with respect to our admissions practices. And as far as leadership roles, I've kind of dabbled around a little bit. When I was a student, I was a part of the student assembly. I was a secretary. And then I kind of fell off for maybe a year or two. And then I jumped into our state association. And I've held kind of various roles through there. Probably one of the most things I'm kind of proud about is I'm actually going to be one of the newer APTA Centennial Scholars. So all of us that are APTA members, if you've never heard of it, just kind of do a quick Google search and learn a little bit more about it. So I'm actually very, very excited about that program because one of the main missions and aim is to kind of develop our next cadre of leaders. So I'm actually excited about that. As far as community-wise, just doing things within my church and kind of local organizations, a few boards here and there. As far as those leadership positions outside of the physical therapy profession. But getting back to the question of, do I see myself as a leader? It depends. So sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. And I think it also depends on like where I am in space. So I think within like my new position in academia, I don't see myself as a leader. I've only been here 3 years. I'm not a program director. I'm not a program chair. I'm not a dean. I don't have a fancy title or anything. I'm just a regular old professor. So in that role, I don't see myself as a leader. But outside of this context, so let's just say I'm volunteering out in the community and there are those that are in high school or middle school, I see myself as a leader to them just because of what I've accomplished throughout life and just kind of like my experience. So I think a lot of it is context driven. But the last little bit I want to say too, I think sometimes when we talk about being a leader and leadership, I really think what we're talking about is like effective leadership or effective leaders. And that's what we're probably kind of getting at, right? Because sometimes we see leaders and they're just leaders because they have a title, right? I worked at a job for 20 years, so now I'm a leader because I'm the manager. But are you effective at what you're doing? And I see myself as growing to be a more effective leader. But I would say some people probably just see me as a leader because of my title and so forth. But yeah, so thanks.
Thank you. So, Dr. Williams-York, been waiting and anticipating your response. Please share with us all of your accolades professionally and or in the community, what positions you hold or have held, and how you regard yourself as far as being a leader and or how others identify you as such. Dr. Williams-York, I think you're muted.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here amongst my esteemed colleagues today. It really is an honor, and especially to talk about leadership. And right now, I am the program director of the entry-level Doctor of Physical Therapy program at the University of Washington in Seattle. And I have previously held program director positions at other institutions, including historically Black colleges. And that is really in addition to serving as a professor at a couple of universities as well. So in total, I've been involved in 4 Doctor of Physical Therapy programs. I also serve as the vice chair of the DEI consortium, which is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Consortium. And my passion has always been in increasing diversity in the physical therapy profession because of the poor numbers, particularly of racial ethnic diversity. So do I consider myself a leader? I hope so, because that is something I've aspired to really make a change in. And I think in order to make a change in anything that you're passionate about, you have to take on a leadership role at times. And sometimes that's unpopular because you have to be the front person, and it might not always be a position in which you receive accolades. You also get some of the criticism. And so I feel that being a leader is more than just having a title, as others have said. It really embodies your personal values and your commitment to what you're doing. And I think if you encompass that, then you will achieve your goals. But you can't not consider yourself a leader unless others are following you in one way or another. If they're emulating you, if they're trying to further your goals or your mission, or they're trying to take whatever you may have started to the next level. I consider that to be a sign of a leader, an effective leader, if what you start, someone else carries on. And so I do think of myself as a leader, and I think that comes from childhood, actually. I was one of 4 children, and it was always me that everybody came to. And we're all close in age, so I think it was just something that I naturally kind of was kind of thrust upon me. And like others, I was reluctant to accept it, but you come to a point at some point in your life where you realize that you're called to do a certain thing. So sometimes I feel like being a leader is a calling, and so that's how I look at myself at this point, as being a leader in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the physical therapy profession.
Thank you so much. I hope that just in this brief introduction of all of the doctors of physical therapy that we're chatting with this evening, one in the audience can see why you have been asked to speak to the audience at large. The ask of tonight is to talk about the pathways to leadership. And I'd really like to get into the nitty-gritty, right? Because tonight's not just about talking about leadership and pathways to leadership, but also representation, right? Representation of unrepresented, minoritized, and or marginalized groups of individuals. And so, Dr. Woods, I'm going to call everybody back, but I'd like you to respond to the first question, as this is initially a female-dominated profession as far as representation in physical therapy. However, most of the positions of leadership, when we start to break it down, happen to be majority of males. However, that is not necessarily the case when we look at African American males in the physical therapy profession and or space and places, from boards to academia or to even in the clinic. So I would like to know, from your standpoint, one, did you have any mentors or mentoring along the way that played a part in your ascent to the positions that we would consider positions of leadership? And if so, at what parts in your progression to these positions did those mentors play key roles?
Thank you. Great question. And I think part of it just stems from, and some of us who's kind of listening now, we know we use this term in the physical therapy world of underrepresentation. And with physical therapy just being a female dominant, so males are starting to kind of become unrepresented. And then if we also add in race and ethnicity, and we're starting to look at kind of Black males, that's even more. So I think for me, part of it just kind of stems from when I see one or two people that look like me, I begin to kind of gravitate towards them. So one person I'll just kind of go and just throw that shot out as a mentor for me was actually a professor of mine when I came through physical therapy school was Julian McGee. So he was the Black male face at my program at Alabama State when I came through. So just kind of seeing that face, I'm like, hey, I can do that. That looks fun, right? And that's where me and him started to kind of have those conversations to try to figure out how did he get to the place that he got to, who poured into him, how they poured into him, and was that a pathway that I wanted to go about? So I just think part one is just visual representation. So if there's anybody that the current physical therapy student now that looks like me, hopefully I can at least be that visual representation to say, hey, this is something that you could do, is to kind of begin to dive into these leadership positions, and or if you want to go into academia. Beyond that, one thing that I've just kind of learned over time, and I can't remember who poured this into me, but they told me that you want to pick up mentors at multiple places or multiple sections of your life. So I've tried my best to get a mentor in like different sections or different factors. So spiritually, I have a mentor there. If we're talking about professionally in academia, I have a mentor there. If we're talking about clinically, I have a mentor there. In business, have a mentor there, because it's very hard for one person to serve all of those things, but looking at multiple people to kind of help you along your journey was one thing that truly kind of helped me get to the pathway that I've gotten to. I feel like there was a second question, Hadia. What was it? I forgot.
I think you pretty much addressed it, because I asked if you had mentors along the way and at what point, and you did address at what point, because you said they occurred along that physical therapy training portion of the way. And then additionally, you have your mentors on these community level, including your spiritual leaders. So I think you really well addressed the questions on hand. Thank you. Dr. Iftakahara, I'm going to go to you next, because some of what Dr. Wood said really stands out to me as far as having mentorships or alignments with people in and outside of the physical therapy profession. And in your introduction, you mentioned that your family even has a free clinic. So I'd like you to share with us some of the development of that opportunity and work that you do in the community with your family. And in addition to those type of volunteer opportunities, what do you do that keeps you charged in the space of leadership?
Those are good questions. I need to think about that for a second. So regarding the free clinic, it's been an incredible opportunity. So I am actually the newest to it, because I just moved here to live with my family, but they've been working on it for a few years. So I really like that my dad is the one that really like spearheaded that. And I'm trying to think, I don't think he holds any formal leadership positions other than he now like kind of has to be the CEO of the clinic. And that was just kind of by default. And yet he is like the person I look up to most and like want to be when I grow up, essentially, because he saw a need and he addressed it. And, you know, there were certainly people that didn't think it was a great idea, not because they didn't want to serve the community. It's just like an issue of like how is best to do that, where is best to put funds and resources and stuff. And so I think that that's been really cool to see him be a leader without needing any of the awards or recognition or anything like that. And yet all of those things still came to him because of just like the genuine work he's been doing. So I think that it's been a nice thing to get involved in, because there's no PTs that work at that clinic. It's all physician driven, or excuse me, PTs or PTAs, or anyone but a physician. And so that's my like point of advocacy right now, is to get some like rehab teams in there to help the community out, because I think that a lot of the people that they see could benefit from like our services as well. So it's still outside of my PT community technically, and yet I now get to like see a need and like help out potentially with like the ortho MDs and DOs that do their work there. Sorry, what was your second question?
No, just what kept you charged, and I think you addressed that. But if you wanted to say more, please do.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that I actually had a job interview where I discussed this, where for me, I've stopped setting goals. Like I have like 2 things on my bucket list that I really want to do, but those aren't even like necessarily associated with my career. And yet I've just worked really hard on like getting to know myself. And I've more so set up like systems to where I like try to stay kind of in the loop. I have so many friends. I'm so blessed to have so many friends like within this profession and outside of it. And so for me, like any new opportunity that comes up, I'm now in a place where I take a step back and think like, is that something that aligns with my values? Is that something that I feel like I could really add to? And because I've been asked to do certain things too, where I'm like, I actually don't think I'm the best person or like fit for that. It would look great on my resume, but like, I don't want to do you a disservice, you know, like, I don't think I have the experience for that. So I think for me, it's more so just like grounding myself in something. For me, that's my faith and like the support that I get from my friends and family. And then thinking, you know, what is it that like truly I feel like I'm the right match for. So setting systems rather than goals has helped me to say yes to a lot more opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't have done, but also to kind of understand when to say no and step away as well, so that I can give my time and energy to something else.
Thank you so much. Dr. Corvus, as we hear and listen to Dr. Iftakahara speak about some of her alignments with her father, and as far as leadership is concerned and involvement in the community, it makes me go to you, because one of the questions we had was, with whom do you align yourself with in your quest to leadership, or once you're in leadership positions and you yourself hold so many different roles? And I hear a lot of your students speak so highly of you, and as their leader, not just their professor, but someone who guides them in their process. Can you speak to somewhat of how you align yourself in your quest, and or how you've aligned yourself once you're in these positions of leadership, with whom you've aligned yourself, if anyone?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely 2 parts. I think, so the first part about how, I think that is really critical. And that, I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, that was really important to me, getting myself into a place where I thought of myself as a leader. It's having a reason to be in a place. Dr. Bernadette Williams York said, you know, that like you called to it, you have a mission, there's some type of reason. And I don't necessarily feel like I was called to anything, but I do feel like anytime I'm in a position, I have to know why I'm there. And I have to know that for myself, not just like why I was asked to be there or what people are asking of me in that place, but why did I say yes? Why did I choose to be there? And whatever that reason is, that's my guide, right? Like that's what I align myself to. And that is what I kind of check myself by when I'm looking at how am I doing, when I'm looking at why are we making these decisions, or should we keep making these decisions, or do we need to reevaluate? And, you know, when you talk about barriers and challenges that come up, there's a lot to manage when you're in a leadership role. There's a lot of people to keep moving in a direction, to keep satisfied and to keep heard and to keep supported. And so if you start to struggle there, part of that for me is, why did I say yes to this? What was important enough for me to say, this is where I want to put my energy, this is where I want to be? And so I kind of align myself to that. So it's different. Every place that I'm in, it's different what I've aligned myself with. So it's kind of, it changes based on the environment. You know, in an academic setting, I align myself with the needs and the goals of the students. You know, I was just talking to some students about this the other day, like teaching is not about you, right? It's not about me, it's about them. And it's about the needs, their needs, the institution's needs, you know, the needs of the profession. These are things we all need to consider together as a team. And so I think of it as a really co-constructed project. And my goal in that role, or I'm given this leadership role, is to keep it co-constructed and to keep those goals center and keep us moving towards them and not get distracted. And to the second part, like, who do I align myself with? I don't have anybody in particular that I would say I align myself with this person. I was thinking about the mentorship question that Yustra was just talking about, and that I don't think that I have and mentor several. I think of everyone I encounter is capable of teaching me something, especially my students. So I feel like I have hundreds of mentors in any given moment, right? It's like I align myself with something I see that I'm like, this is working, or this looks meaningful, or this looks effective. What can I learn from what this person is doing? And in that moment, I can kind of align myself in that space to kind of be receptive and to learn something, see what I can take away from it. So I think of myself as really being very mobile and mutable in that way, and not being really stuck to one philosophy or one space or one individual in that way.
Thank you. So Dr. Williams-York, as Dr. Corvus talked about the relationships or alignments, I wanted to really touch base with you, given your background in working with 4 different institutions and many roles of leadership within the profession. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the ways you intentionally or unintentionally formed fruitful relationships along the way?
Thank you, Hadia. And ultimately, it's relationships that drive everything. And I think that how have I formed relationships, and how have I nurtured those relationships? I think that when I think about that, it really is one of the keys to being successful in any leadership role. I think that it's important to really, even in this forum, how much I'm learning from my colleagues and hearing their experiences with leadership. So aligning yourself with others who think like you, and then also hearing those who think differently than you. So I think relationship building is important. One way to do that, I think, is to be involved in the profession. Find an area that excites you, that you have passion in, and then get involved. And then once you're in that particular area that you're interested in, you'll find others who share that same interest. And then you'll start cultivating relationships within those groups. And so that is something that I strongly recommend. I think the APTA has not done a good job in the past of giving those opportunities to those who were not from the majority, for those who were therapists of color. It was difficult to see yourself in any of our big meetings, or even small meetings on the state level. And so that created sometimes a sense of isolation. I applaud the APTA now for trying to do better in that area, and then really trying to create a sense of community and a sense of belonging for those who are from underrepresented and marginalized groups. And so it was more difficult for me when I was a young physical therapist. When I listened to the young therapists on here today, it's really encouraging to hear that there are many more opportunities now for them to form these relationships. Because as I started out by saying, relationships are key. And I'm thankful for the opportunities I have had to be among groups and to work among task force, and to be a part of a faculty and to form relationships there. So reaching out, nurturing those relationships, however what you can. And oftentimes that requires face-to-face meetings. We can't do that now, but whenever we can do that, just to build those relationships, because ultimately those are the things that nurture us, and that will lead to more opportunities if you become really effective in building good, strong relationships.
Thank you so much. So Dr. Nixon Cave, I want to build on what Dr. Williams-York shared, and particularly the aspect of getting involved. When we think of leadership and describe it as pathways, one of the questions that comes to mind are what are the leadership entry points? And I want to go a step further with you because of the roles that you hold in academia and that you are all through the spectrum of having a board specialty area of practice, as well as roles in the fellowship of the American Physical Therapy Association. And speaking specifically on representation, how, in addition to what are the leadership entry points, how does one get leadership buy-in to promoting or hiring or electing, in our case in the profession, and maintaining people of underrepresented, minoritized, and marginalized populations in these limited positions of leadership?
Okay, good question. So one of the things, and listening to all the, the questions, I think it's about being at the table. The positions that I've been involved in with the APPTS and residency and fellowship and pediatrics and, different aspects of APTA was about being at the table, being there more or less to take advantage of the opportunity. So anytime that I saw that there was opportunity to get involved, and no matter how small the task was, I saw it as the opportunity to learn and to grow. I think having more someone who looks like me in those positions kind of reminds people that, there aren't many people that look like me, and how do we change that? And so by me being at the table and getting involved, opportunities sort of come your way, and you also open the door for other people. I think about, the question about relationships. I think relationships and aligning yourself is more about, seeking opportunity to engage with individuals. Some people might call it networking. I call it as seeking, opportunities and taking on challenges, within your leadership. As far as when you're in those positions, you run into people who can give you mentoring or give you opportunity to learn from them. One of the things is we aren't in the in crowd a lot of times, so we are underrepresented. But if you seek out, those opportunities and get involved, I think you see more, you get more opportunity. And it's not about necessarily having the title. Being yes, I've been the chair of APPS. I've been involved in residency and fellowship and a lot of those different areas. But it's not about the title, at least not for me. It's more about having the opportunity to open the door and be at the table. Because if I'm sitting at the table, you can't ignore that I'm there and that we don't have a lot of diversity in our association. But going back to like Bernadette said, when I started out, there wasn't anyone that looked like me, someone I could go and be mentored by. But you take advantage of the environment that you're in. And I know a lot of times there's discussion about getting mentors, minority mentors and what have you. And I say you take mentors where you find them. I think sort of what Selena was saying, we can learn something from a lot of from everyone, and it's just a matter of reaching out and thinking and taking advantage of what they have to offer, and moving forward within that. So yeah, there is a real issue with underrepresentation in our leadership, and thinking about how do we change that. And I think it's just getting people, to realize that you can leave from where you are. You don't have to have the title. You don't have to have the big, the big job. You just need to be in there working and, making your presence known.
Thank you all. So what I'd like to do is bring everybody back to the stage, and I'm going to ask questions, and I want you guys just to jump in. I'd prefer if one person responds to it, and if you're itching to respond to it in addition, just let me know. But we have another 20 minutes and tons more questions to really dive into when we're thinking strategically about what leadership means. How do we put people in the positions of leadership or roles in which they can assist with leading and shaping that which is in front of them, or creating? How do we facilitate that? So I'm going to ask a question, and feel free to jump in, and then we'll move right on to the next question. And the first one I'm going to ask is, how much of leadership that we're talking about is just an attitude or who you know, as opposed to demonstrated skill?
I don't think it's who you know. And, it's always that debate, are you a born leader? I think the opportunities that the leadership positions I've been in, I wasn't seeking them or what have you, but I kind of go with, you feel like you were supposed to be there, that, you were called to be in that position. And so once you're there, is, well, why am I here? And what am I supposed to do here? So I don't know if it's an attitude, because I feel I'm more of a quiet leader. So I don't think there's that attitude. And as far as, what was the other part?
How much of it is attitude or who you know, and then as opposed to demonstrated skill?
Yeah, I don't think it's an attitude, and there's somewhat of who you know, but it gets back to that relationship question, because I think to me, there's a difference between someone who thinks they're a leader and someone who has a title, and a difference between a manager and a leader. A manager does tasks, and a leader achieves goals and leads people and makes a change, makes a difference in the environment that they're in, or whatever they're seeking to do. So I think there's clearly a difference.
So this next question, and I really want you to challenge yourselves potentially and think about it from being of an underrepresented or minoritized group or population. And when you think of leadership and or the positions that you're in, or or the ones that you didn't get into, what can you identify as some of the things or people that blocked you? And I mean unnecessarily. So was it, who blocked you? And I'm not asking you to name people, but was it a supervisor? Was it a peer? Was it someone else out of the box that we might normally think of? And how do you recommend that institutions, organizations, or programs address the unnecessary or harmful blocks?
I'll address that. I have had the experience of a supervisor who wanted me to do something that I considered unethical, and I refused to do it. And then I ended up suffering the consequences of that, which led to me being removed from my leadership position. And I think that whenever you're in a position of leadership or prominence and you have a certain standards and values, there will be those who challenge that. And I think that those are opportunities for us to learn a little bit more about ourselves, whether we succumb to that challenge or whether we stand for the values in which we believe. And so I have no regrets about that. What I think the institutions can do to prevent those situations is to have firm policies in place and to protect the the integrity of the people who are subordinates to others who are in leadership positions. So I think that those type of strong policies are really necessary so that others will be able to express themselves and stand in their position of integrity without threat of being punished or removed by someone who's superior to them.
Thank you. Is there anything that any of you can identify that was a facilitator structurally? So in the structure of where you work or commune or volunteer that actually facilitated equity, or that you could call out, or if you could design something within the place of your workplace that would facilitate equity and facilitating ascent towards positions of leaderships or seats at the table?
I can speak to that one.
Yes, thank you.
So when I graduated high school, I actually went to the Air Force Academy for a couple years. And I know we have some things with all our academies with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But one thing I remember that we did at the academy is it was sort of a forced leadership role. So it was in an environment where you were actually just given the opportunity to kind of learn how to be a leader. So basic training, one person will be the squadron commander for, let's just say, a week. The next week, it'll be somebody else. So it was more of kind of like a simulated environment where you could actually kind of get that experience on how to be a leader. And I think the other thing that goes along with it, and I would argue, it's tough to be an effective leader if you can't be an effective follower, or if you can't be a follower at all. So I think it taught us both, where how do we follow? And then also, now that we have that leadership position, how do we lead effectively? So I would say that was an environment to kind of help me to kind of get in those positions and just have that empathy, sympathy to be able to relate those that I'm actually guiding. Because like our panel spoke about, like, I don't think we're actually leading people. We're just guiding them towards whatever their goal is, whether it's a group goal or it's a goal that I created that everybody's on board with. We're just guiding everybody to kind of reach our goal, our mission, and so forth.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to jump in on that or respond to that?
I want to add just actually something I see between what both Bernadette and Ladarius had to say is that intentionality in there. There's that structure, right? That can prevent something harmful from happening, or that can support people being put into leadership and learning that both sides. And I find I've often been, I think challenges or, being blocked has come from above in all of my cases. And when you look at how do we mitigate that? What do we put into place to make it so that leadership is more accessible, or that people have more opportunities, or that the things that you're putting into the world are given space? I think we have to consider that in the society we live in now, and a lot of the systems and structures we live in now, we cannot expect equity to just manifest, right? We have to be intentional about looking at what's happening and then putting policies, programs, rules, guides in place so that we say, no, we've decided to do things this way for this reason to get to the goal of equitable outcomes or, equitable access. And so I think just listening to both of you, that's just what kept coming up, right? It's that was what I was originally thinking, like, that's what helps. And both of you are kind of talking to that a little bit, is that we have to think about that in the systems that we're in, but also as we build new ones. If we join new clinics, if we join new institutions, if we start new committees and programs and movements, how are we structuring them so that they facilitate these things to happen on paper, right? Not just like, we'll be equitable. So
when you speak about equity and what Dr. Nixon Cave mentioned about access to leadership, what can you identify as your level of comfort and or timing? For instance, is now this time when we're bubbling with civil rights issues to address things overtly? So what is your level of comfortability is saying now in the positions that you're in, or would you advise someone who might be asking your opinion to say to their own leadership, we don't have any Black people in our leadership positions at this association. We don't have any women in these positions of academia. How do you get to that level of comfortability if you're not already there? Given that we know that we have the risks, like Dr. Williams-York shared, of potentially being knocked down.
Yeah, I think it is uncomfortable, but if you've been in a position when you are the only one all the time, and you start looking around every meeting, every Zoom meeting, every faculty meeting, whatever, college meeting, and you start looking around, you realize you're the only one, and you've been the only one since PT school, since college, and you have to be willing to be that voice, to bring up the conversation, as uncomfortable as it is. I think that's why I feel that sometimes we're put in these positions, as uncomfortable as it is. But I think having discussions about why is it important, if it's no more than just for students to have someone to look up to or have a role model, and I reflect on what would it have been like if I had a role model when I, a Black female or Black male in PT school, or even in my PhD, what would that have been like? And so to put myself in those students' position, I think we have to, take that step. And it is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. I teach a lot of about diversity, equity, inclusion, and cultural competence, and really focus on clinical reasoning and clinical decision making. And it's an uncomfortable discussion to have, but we have to have that discussion, because we're doing ourselves a disservice, we're doing our students a disservice, and ultimately our patients a disservice. So it is an uncomfortable conversation, but I think people have to step up and be willing to do it. And maybe I've just gotten to the age where it's like, when you hear your grandmother say whatever they want, not that old yet, but you feel like, okay, enough is enough. I have to say something because I'm here for a reason. Why am I sitting here? Why am I always in these positions? And if I don't say anything, this is going to continue, and I have to be the one that puts myself out there so that someone can come along and stand on my shoulders.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more that, it takes a lot of bravery, but there's a lot of people who have built the bricks before us, be it with their own bodies at times, that allow us to step forward. And we have about 8 minutes left, and there's going to be a point at which I'm going to give you each a minute to do a quick round robin, a minute response to a question. But before we get there, I want to remind the audience to please submit your questions for the 30-minute question and answer that will begin around 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for those of us in the East Coast, and you can do the time differential from where you are watching. We didn't touch base on physical therapy assistants. For those of you who work with PTAs or PTA programs, what are some of the leadership pathways for physical therapy assistants? And do they look different than what you would potentially see for a physical therapist in the prevention profession?
I don't have a lot of experience teaching PTAs other than for, clinical instructor course. But I have worked years ago with PTAs. I don't know if there's much more diversity within that population, in that group either. But I do think, again, going on the premise that you can leave from where you are, I think there are many pathways that they can be leaders within their clinical environment, taking on, again, opportunity to be involved, maybe, giving an in-service or, presenting and being involved in committees and things of that nature. So I think, a PTA can certainly be in a leadership role. And I think it's how they view themselves, and how they believe that we as PTs view them. But I've worked with a lot of great, strong PTAs in the past. And I think that there are opportunities out there for them. It's just how they seek those opportunities.
So the round robin question, now that we have 5 minutes left, you'll each have a minute to respond before we go into our live Q&A session with the audience, is how do you stay motivated? You're in these positions of leadership, and one can only imagine the demands that you face either personally and professionally. So once you're in these positions of leadership, what is important to maintain your sanity, your growth, and or share with us your learned lessons? I don't expect you to answer every single part of that, but answer what speaks to you in that question of what's important to maintain your sanity, your growth, and or what are the learned lessons that you could share with the audience. And Dr. Corbus, I would like to start with you.
Sure. I would say lean into the things that bring you joy, the things that make you laugh, especially when they are not related to what you're doing. That works for me. That really comes from, we are multiplicitous as people, every individual. So when we get bogged, leadership takes so much time. Right? Anytime that you were involved in leading something, it takes time. And anytime you come across something that just kind of breaks you out a little bit of the mind frame that you're in and just kind of like brings you that joy, that's something that you should lean into. That's my recommendation. I lean into that because it does two things. It re-energizes me, and more often than not, it gives me a completely different frame on the world because it takes me out of what I'm doing. And then when I look back at what I'm doing, I have a different set of eyes. I can bring a new set of knowledge. I can relate something that seems irrelevant to that. And then that makes the whole task new again. And that brings new energy to what's going on. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Dr. Iftakahara, share with us what you think is important once in these leadership positions to maintain your sanity, your growth, or some learned lessons.
I mean, in terms of like how I stay motivated and how I like what drives me and stuff, like I definitely don't. And I wouldn't want to normally admit this just because, I mean, however it makes me look as a leader. But like earlier this month, I texted one of my APTA mentors and said, I'm never running for another leadership position again. And whether I meant it truly at the time or not, I don't know. But I think for me, what it took was truly thinking about, okay, what if I did mean it? And imagining myself stepping back from either my current position or a position in the future and realizing that like, that's not actually what I want. There's other things going on that like make it difficult sometimes to be a leader, especially one that like values honesty and transparency and like being relentless and like the pursuit of like whatever equity you're fighting for. But I think for me, like it's important to have those moments sometimes of like, I'm done, I give up, because I think it's in those moments that I think, no, I don't really mean that. And like, what's my why essentially? And it helps me to truly figure out like the true purpose of being in leadership versus just being in a position just to do it, just to fill my time or just to say that I was a leader. It helps me to truly figure out, okay, like what is best for me? Do I need to take a step back? And I think it's completely fine to not be motivated sometimes. I think it's okay to take breaks and to give yourself grace and to not always want to be kind of in the spotlight that you sometimes are as a leader. But I think that there's just so many different ways to be a leader. And for me, it's just been allowing myself to feel every feeling versus feeling like I have to bottle certain things up just because I'm a leader. That doesn't make me any less of a person, and it doesn't make me any less imperfect just because I am a leader.
Thank you. So, Dr. Woods, your 1-minute response to maintaining sanity, your growth, or learned lessons.
Yeah, so I'll just speak to maintaining sanity. Find your happy place. Whatever that happy place is, find it. Mine is the gym. My wife, she doesn't like this, but I'll probably go to the gym at least 5 to 6 days a week. And the reason she doesn't like it because we have small kids. I have a 6-month-old, she's almost 6 now. 6-month-old, and I have a 2.5-year-old. So when I leave, I actually leave her with the kids. She doesn't like that. But I would just say, find your happy space, whatever that place is. Mine is the gym, and you just need that place where you can just get away from everything. Sometimes it could be a book, or it could be, I don't know, YouTube, Facebook, whatever you get lost, just take some time for yourself every day to get lost. And that would be
Thank you so much, Dr. Woods. Dr. Williams, your thoughts on maintaining sanity, your growth, or learned lessons? Oh, unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Great question. And what I do to maintain sanity is to unplug sometimes and just to take a break. To get out there in nature is so restorative for me. So I really enjoy taking a walk. I practice meditation. I also practice yoga. So those are ways where I go inside and can just, really get centered and balanced again. And I think that is the key, is maintaining some balance, particularly in this COVID environment, the challenges that brings, the chaotic year of 2020, in addition to being in a leadership position at this point. It's very important for me to stay balanced. And so that's what I do, is I try to unplug, take some time off of Zoom meetings, get out there in nature without my cell phone, and continue my practice of yoga and meditation. Really works for me to keep me balanced and keeps me, recharges me, re-energizes me, and gives me that push I need to get back on the horse and to continue doing what I'm doing, that I know is something that I'm called to do.
Thank you. Dr. Nixon Cave, your response.
Well, I'm going to answer it from what keeps me motivated, what keeps me going. And, I look at it from, how do I measure my success? And I have 2 boys, 2 Black males. And that's my motivation, for them to see what it's like for someone to be in a position of leadership or achieving goals and setting goals. And that, that's the motivation that keeps me going. But also for them to see that I'm not just taking on positions or leadership opportunities just to take them because they're there, because I learned that from a mentor a long time ago. Opportunities come and go. But I want them to understand that every decision that I make in leadership, and getting involved in, the association, is based on what's best for them and what's going to set them up to be strong Black men, and be leaders, and for them to feel comfortable that they can speak comfortably, and not feel like they have to be chosen, that they can step out and be leaders in their own right, and understand that the world is out there for them, and that they can seek out opportunities on their own. So that, I would say, that's my motivation. Do I get burned out sometimes or frustrated, sometimes? But then I go back to, what is my goal? Why am I participating in this leadership role? And so I think we all experience that, and sometimes just taking a step back. And as Bernadette said, stepping away for a little bit. But I would say I stay motivated because I want to make sure that I'm a role model for my sons.
Thank you all for those words of wisdom. I think it's important to not just concentrate on the thriving or surviving, but the wellness and of your being and your spirit as you lead, because I think in that you're teaching others how to take care of themselves as well, and not only take care of others, which is inherent in our nature of the work that we do as clinical, academic, and or research professionals. So let's move into this Q&A segment, and any of you are welcome to respond. The first question I'm going to ask is, do any of you have leadership programs at your institutions or know of any in the community? So, for example, how APTA has an education leadership program. Do any of your institutions have any, or organizations, and what do they look like?
I would think, as most universities, there's leadership academies and things that, of that nature, whether it's specifically for minorities or what have you. But there are leadership programs. But again, it's all about having the opportunity to participate in that.
So if any of you want to speak, please do. Am I correct in understanding from the lack of response that most of your organizations don't have anything that's specific at this time, or maybe in the process of thinking about for underrepresented minorities in the vein of leadership pipelines?
I would say, so I'm up in Oregon, and APTA Oregon is in the process of developing a leadership development program. And I would not say it's specifically targeted at underrepresented minorities in the profession, but it is specifically being designed to be very, very accessible and equitable. So anybody who is a member of APTA Oregon basically has access to it for free, because our goal is that we see all PTs as leaders. PTs, PTAs, PT students, everyone in the profession is a leader to some degree. And we recognize that with a little bit of support, a little bit of information, and making that really easily accessible, we can support people towards moving into the type of leadership they're interested in. So the model that we're working on has kind of like a foundational leadership course that's like multi-part, talking about the self and then talking about others, and then it branches out from there. So you can kind of pick what kind of leader you want to be. Do you want to go into government and policy? Do you want to go into community organizing? Do you want to go into education? And the goal is to develop different tracks that let people kind of get information about what they're interested in, so that they are then equipped to move into leadership positions. And then the goal eventually is to also set people up with mentors within APTA Oregon or APTA broadly, as we have access to them. So it's not currently open, but I'm on the team of people that's trying to develop that.
Thank you. So there are seemingly a dearth of specified leadership pipelines that we're knowledgeable, but there probably are resources that some of you know of. So are there some leadership resources, whether they're books or videos, anything you could think of that you would recommend? And at what stage in one's career would you say that one would benefit from these resources?
Well, I'll speak to that, and that is that as soon as possible. I mean, I think that we learn in physical therapy or physical therapy assistant school that we are lifelong learners, and that if you indeed do inspire to be a leader in any capacity in any of the dimensions of our profession, then it's never too soon to start. And there are just so many books available and resources available online these days, even and either through hardcover or on Audible or on YouTube. I mean, there's just so many resources. You can't even read them all. And I can't really, recommend just a few, but there are some, really well-known books, and then there are some that are new. But the opportunities are available that you can really educate yourself on, get a degree in leadership without formally getting a degree, because there's so many resources now available to anybody who's seeking it. So I would say, seek those resources, even if you do a Google search, or reach out to individuals who you respect and ask them what's in their library. I mean, I have a whole library of books in my audible.com that I could read off to you, but I can't think of all the names of them right now. But I love to read, and I've read many of the books in the past, including books developing me as an individual, not just as a leader, but my spiritual development, my emotional development, the holistic approach. I think that when we lead, we bring all of that to that role, and so I would encourage people to seek those types of books too, that are developing every aspect of yourself, because we're more than just the physical therapists that we our degree encompasses all of who we are. So I would say you can get an education in being a leader just by doing a Google search and really looking at some of those books and resources that are available.
I also think the APTA, and Ladarius, correct me if I'm wrong, the Centennial Scholar Program is about leaders. Is that correct? Fostering leadership.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think the APTA has been putting forth some, putting forth resources and opportunity, to help develop leaders. I don't know, and Ladarius may know better, how much of it is really focused on including underrepresented minorities. But I do know just from reading information about the Centennial Scholar that it is about leadership and moving people into leadership positions in the APTA. So that's another good resource. And there's plenty of opportunities through the Engage site of APTA where people can get involved at various levels, activities or task forces or things of that nature, that it may not be a book or what have you, but a lot of times, leadership, learning to be a leader comes with on-the-job training and opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted.
Can I add something as well? I was going to say too that I think my comment is maybe more for like PTA students or new grads, like just people who maybe anyone who's like struggling to feel like they don't belong in a leadership position, or that they're like not good enough or experienced enough to apply to something. I think that like reading books and resources and things like that that are specifically about leadership is great, but I don't think that you have to necessarily, there's obviously no one way to be a leader, right? So there are widely accepted leadership principles and rules of like professionalism even that like I don't subscribe to and I don't believe in. And so I don't think that makes me any less of a leader. It just might make me a better fit for one position over another. And so I think too, I love the point about just being very well-rounded and kind of like reading to build up every part of yourself, because I think that there's something to be learned from everything. And so you don't have to be reading a ton of self-help books to like become a better person. Like you can do that with fiction. You can do that with watching Netflix. Like you do have to be a little bit intentional about things, and you have to self-reflect and know yourself and learn how those things are impacting you. But I don't think that there's any one way really to go about it, and you don't have to go about it the same way as everybody else. I think as long as you are being like genuine to yourself and to the needs of your community, then there's just so many different ways to do it. Because I've read some books that other people have recommended to me that like made them a better leader, and I'm like, that book was terrible. Like I didn't finish it, and that doesn't mean the book was actually terrible and that it didn't have something to offer me. It just wasn't for me. I just am not the same type of leader as that person, because I'm not the same person as that person. So again, like, what does leadership really mean? What does a leader really mean? Like, it's really, I think, truly about just like who you are as a person and like where you want to serve some mission that's bigger than yourself.
Thank you. And Dr. Woods, I want you to give you an opportunity to talk about the Centennial Leadership Program. And then I have a question for the panel.
Sure, sure. So this year, and I actually just received an email earlier today, because COVID has kind of ransacked everything. But so this year, APTA launched the Centennial Scholar. So basically, what that is they're bringing together 100 scholars, and each of our chapters had a chance to nominate one professional, and then each of our academies or sections had a chance to nominate. And if they did not, then some could nominate multiple. And the idea is just to create our next cadre of leaders. And going back to Kim's question, it's not directly geared towards underrepresented minorities, but that's one of the main tenets of it, is to kind of bring out more of those leaders into the forefront. Some things is just kind of one-on-one mentoring. There's an actual a project. So Talina, I'll probably be reaching out to you, because one of the things that I want to do in Alabama is exactly what you guys are doing in Washington, is actually start to begin to kind of create these leadership tracks or these leadership things. And that is one thing I would probably kind of, I guess, challenge and urge everybody to do, is when you see a hole, try to fill it. So you may not be that person, but see if we can begin to kind of field and kind of create those bridges, those networks, those ladders, so we can kind of build up those leadership things that we've been looking out for. Because I would agree, I don't think there's one way to lead, because I think we all come into it at different levels and different stages of our lives, and we need our leaders, or those that we're following, to kind of adjust to who we are and how we are at that stage of our life. But one of the biggest things with the Centennial Scholar is a capstone project, primarily geared towards, again, kind of creating that next cadre of leaders.
Thank you. So you touched on the gaps, and that leads me to the next question to the panel. And we've spoken a lot about your roles in leadership and how you got to positions of leadership as people who are of groups that are identified as underrepresented, minoritized, or marginalized populations of people. My question is, with whom does the responsibility lie? Is the responsibility solely on that person who is of the underrepresented population? And if not, then with whom does it lie? And what would you call those who are also responsible, whether they be allies or the people who are already in positions of leadership?
Well, I'll speak to that, and I think the responsibility lies with whoever wants to make a difference, whoever sees a need to make a change, and so that is indeed the person who is seeking to assume a position of leadership. But it's also the American Physical Therapy Association, for example. So it's associations, it's institutions, it's facilities, it's organizations that want to make a difference. So even if they don't have people of color at the table right now, if that is something that they value, then it's incumbent upon them to make it a part of their mission, their vision, their strategic plan, and to really promote the value of diversity. And there's lots of literature now saying that organizations are stronger, that outcomes are better in either in academia and the classroom, or if we as a profession have more people of color as physical therapists, we're going to address the needs of those who look like underrepresented minority citizens. So there'll be less health disparities, for example. So the value is there, and the literature supports it. So anybody who buys into that, anybody who understands that, then it's their responsibility as well, whether on the organizational level or on the individual level. Anyone who understands the value of having diverse voices at the table, then it's their responsibility to do what they can to make a difference.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add their thoughts?
The only thing I would add to this, is that having someone at the table is having the right person at the table that can, bring the skill set that's needed. Because what we don't want is, the token experience where it's like, okay, we need to have a Black person sitting at the table. Okay, this person looks good. So I think it's really, I agree with Bernadette, the people there have to be the one to make the change, but you want to bring in the person that is right and is bringing the skill set and has the same goals and vision to make that change.
Let's unpack the right person at the table, and that right person at the table having the skills and or expertise. But I was just having this conversation earlier today with someone who is of the majority population, and even just speaking on the level of a work group, and where you're bringing people into a project, and the dichotomy or the challenges that may exist in putting the right person at the table if certain groups have been consistently marginalized and or prevented from even getting the training, experience, or expertise that would qualify them to be in that position at the table or be in a position of leadership. How do you bridge that? How and when do you take the risk and bring somebody who may not fit every single checkbox of that table, who does fit the potential to ascend to that position if they had the right partnering or allying into that position? When is it okay to say, okay, this person isn't exactly what we would always put in this position, but they're the right person right now?
Well, I guess I should answer since I brought up the right person. I agree. I don't think they have to have every, requirement to be in that position, but they need to bring something, to the table. It's sort of the same issue you deal with when you're trying to increase the diversity of your class. You want to recruit students who are going to be successful. You just don't want to say, okay, we're going to, save so many seats and we're just going to put minority students in seats. No, you really have to they have to meet a certain criteria, because if we don't bring the right person in, and if we don't bring the right students in, it's going to have more of a negative impact. It's going to be more, I told you so. And so I agree that they don't have to have every requirement, meet every criteria to be involved in the task force, but I think they have to bring some, some aspects, some of the skills, some of the criteria to be involved in that, and a willingness to learn and a willingness to open themselves up to learn. But I think we have to make sure that we're bringing in the right person, because that would assume that there aren't the person, that we don't have anybody that's from underrepresented group that could possibly meet those criteria. And that's not necessarily true.
Anyone else want to speak to this?
Yeah.
I think
I would just like to echo. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Y'all all have an opportunity. Go for it.
Okay, I'd just like to echo what Kim said, in that the most important quality, I think, is a willingness to learn. So if the person has a willingness to learn and they demonstrated skill on whatever level they've been at, and and they've done well at whatever level they've previously been at, and they're willing to learn, and they have a passion for whatever it is that you're asking them to do, then I think that is one of the criteria that's essential.
Thank you, Dr. Corvus, and then Dr. Wood.
Oh, no. Go on, Dr. Wood.
All right.
So I would just want to say one thing, and we have a little chat going on. And in the chat, I see tokenism. And one thing I would just say is there's no one person. Like, I can't represent all Black males in the physical therapy profession. So I really want that to be a clear understanding, is we're going to all come in with our biases, our perspective, and different things that we want to, or how we believe that we want to move the needle forward, right? We got a presidential debate. I think it's going on now or a little bit later, right? We have two parties, right? Red and blue, and they all want to move the country forward, right? But they all have a different way of moving the country forward. So I think one thing that truly just needs to be understood is like no one person can represent an entire class of people, race, ethnicity, whatever we want to call it. So I think that's one of those keys with that leadership position is whomever steps into that role, having those conversations, being open, honest, transparent, and like I don't represent the majority, but this is me and this is where I am within said space.
Thank you. Dr. Iftakahara?
Yeah, Dr. Woods, that point was so important. And that was one that I wanted to make too. I was the only Muslim in my PT cohort. I really haven't met any Muslim like mentors. I have one or two friends who are Muslim who are like recent grads like myself. And for me, like there's just so much pressure to succeed, and not only to succeed, but like go above and beyond. Otherwise, I'm negatively representing every Muslim that comes after me. And so I think it's been important for me to see how I think recruitment efforts are great. Like, I think it's all of the above, right? So like, yes, like recruitment efforts like need to be there to increase diversity of the cohort, but then like, how are you retaining your minority like faculty and staff? And how are you keeping your like minority students happy? So like, for lack of a better example, the one that like immediately comes to mind is when, as soon as I got to Duke, like day one of orientation, a couple of the professors pulled me aside and showed me that they had installed like a curtain in their classroom so that I could participate in like palpation lab or whatever and like take my scarf off if I needed to. And that was kind of an immediate fix to something that like, I mean, it wasn't even a problem anymore, right? Like my hijab wasn't an issue because they had already had the foresight to address it because they had had a Muslim student in the past. And so I think on the hiring end of things, it's about like, if you want to be seen as someone who is inclusive and you are trying to improve diversity, just because someone doesn't succeed within your system doesn't necessarily mean that like diversity is bad or that like minorities are lesser than. I think it's really important to evaluate your system and think, is this something that's even setting, you know, my students, my colleagues, whomever up to succeed? Because I think that like there are like certain networking events, right? Like take place at bars or like involve alcohol. I don't drink, so like I can't go to those things. And so do I lose out on opportunities then? And am I seen as a worse person? Am I seen as someone who like doesn't want to participate and doesn't want to put herself out there just because I'm not going? But it's something totally separate from my like actual aspirations as a PT. So I think just a reevaluation of like your systems and bringing in consultants, I think is really good and important, just to kind of think like, I know I have the intention to be an inclusive person. I know like looking at like whoever the candidates are, like you want whoever's best for you, but then thinking about like what is it within your system that can like allow that person to succeed? Because I just feel like certain metrics like don't really tell you a whole lot about how someone's going to be in the classroom. So it's more so looking at what am I doing to make sure that I'm boosting this person up and helping them to be at the same level as every other person.
Thank you all. We are down to the last 2 minutes, and I kind of want to do a round robin and ask you each to think of one word that comes to mind when I ask, what does leadership mean to you? I'll give you a moment to pause. And Dr. Wood, I'm going to have you go first.
Growth.
Dr. Williams-York.
Accountability.
Dr. Corbin.
Creativity.
Dr. Nixon Cave.
Opportunity.
And Dr. Iftakahara.
Potential.
And one more question. How important is it to say yes? When you're thinking about leadership specifically, you're being asked whether it is with relation to your being of underrepresented population or marginalized population. How important is it to say yes in one sentence? Or you can answer how important it is to say no in one sentence. Dr. Nixon Cave.
I think it's important to know when to say yes and when to say no.
Dr. Iftakahara.
I think they're equally as important. And I think that for me earlier on, like as a student, it was more helpful to say yes more often because I didn't quite know my place and myself yet within this profession. But now that I've graduated and have had a lot of opportunities and involvement, I have a better sense of when actually I should say yes or no.
Dr. Williams-York.
I think that Kim's answer is the answer that I'm going to say as well, is that particularly when you're young in your profession or you're new to something, saying yes will give you experience and exposure. And then as you grow and develop and you get a sense of where your path is and what you're called to do, you check to see if those opportunities are in alignment with what you want to do and fit into the time restraints that you have. And so you may have to say no. So it's a both answer, yes and no.
Dr. Williams-York and Dr. Iftakahara, you have mastered the compound sentences. So Dr. Corvus, you get the last word. We are at our final moment of the hour.
Oh no, I was going to actually echo Dr. Iftakahara and say it is just as important as saying no.
Thank you all. It was such a pleasure and an honor to be in your presence. I've had an awesome time doing these series, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to work together in the future and continue to build those bridges and pathways for those who are coming along the pathway with us and those who are following in the reins. I wish you all a good night and a great rest of the year.
Thank you.